Hello, this is your mini lesson, little preparation before your quiz today. Your quiz is on the formulas that we've been studying, midpoint formula, finding the other endpoint, and distance formula. To guide your thinking as you prepare for your quiz, think about the similarities and the differences between these formulas. It'll help you build a deep understanding of each to compare and contrast them. Our midpoint formula takes the x's of our endpoints, adds them, and divides by 2. It does the same for the y's of our endpoint. This would give us the x-coordinate of our midpoint, and this part of the formula would give us the y-coordinate of our midpoint. An example, what is the midpoint of the segment with endpoints p, -1, 2, and q, 6, -4? We place our x's over here, adding them together and then dividing by 2. And now we take our y's, our 2 and -4, and we're adding them and dividing by 2. Handling this operation here, you can plug it into your calculator, making sure to use this negative sign. We'll get 5 and -2. Dividing each by 2, we get our midpoint, 2.5 and -1. Now let's see if we can catch the mistake. Give yourself a moment to check out the work that is here in the substitution of the formula and see if you can spot the mistake. If you said that the y's are perfectly fine, but there's something wrong with the x's, you're correct. They needed to take -1 and 6, add them together and divide by 2. Instead, it looks like they just took both coordinates for p, which is a common error that we see. So add your x's, divide by 2, add your y's, divide by 2 for the midpoint. Okay, we're going to do the same for both distance formula and finding the other endpoint. You'll see an example and then try to catch the mistake. This is our formula for finding the other endpoint. We split the midpoint formula into our x's added, dividing by 2, our y's added, divided by 2. But this time, we make each of these separate parts equal to the x-coordinate of the midpoint and the y-coordinate of the midpoint. So watch what happens when we start substituting in to find our other endpoint. We're labeling x1, y1, x2, y2. We're substituting what we have. Here's our x1 and our y1. And we're leaving our x2 and our y2 as variables. We're making this side of the equation equal to the x-coordinate of the midpoint. We're making this part of the equation, our y part of the equation, equal to the y-coordinate of that midpoint. The next step is to solve. We need to use inverse operations to start cleaning up this left side of the equation and try to solve for our missing value, our variable. We can see that it's divided by 2, so we'll multiply by 2 on both sides to get rid of this 2. When we do that on the left side, we have 0 plus x2 equals 4. Subtracting 0 on both sides gives us the x-coordinate of our other endpoint, 4. We can do the same to the y side. Let's multiply by 2 on both sides to try to isolate our variable. Next, we'll have to subtract 1 on both sides to get y2 alone, and then we can solve for it. y2 equals 5. All right, let's see if you can spot the mistake. Here's our formula for finding the other endpoint. And in this example, there's a mistake. If you said that the mistake was the way in which they substituted, you're correct. It looks like they substituted 5 and -4 into the formula, as though we were looking for the midpoint. But 5 and negative 4 are the midpoint. Instead, this 5 should be here. The x part of our midpoint formula is equal to 5, the x coordinate of the midpoint. And this negative 4 should be here. The y part of our midpoint formula is equal to the y coordinate of the midpoint. And this x2 and y2, this is what we're solving for. We're looking for the other endpoint. One more, distance formula. Our distance formula takes the difference between the x's, squares it, and adds it to the difference between the y's squared. An example with p and q. We have p at negative 1, 2, and q at 6, negative 4. We're looking for the distance or the length of this segment. We're subtracting the x's, making sure that we follow the same order. 6 minus negative 1, squaring it, plus negative 4 minus 2, and squaring it. You can either plug this whole thing into your calculator or take it step by step, perhaps simplifying inside of the parentheses and squaring it. Making sure again to use the correct sign and the negative in front of our values here for negative 4 and negative 1. Adding these together, you get 85. Finally, take the square root. To get 9.219. Here's this value to the nearest tenth, where we looked next to our 10th place and we saw a 1, so we kept the 2 the same, or to the nearest hundredth, where we rounded this 1 up because it was next to a very big number, 9. This is 5 or greater, so we rounded up. All right, let's see if we can catch the mistake. Here's our distance formula. There are 2 mistakes here. The first mistake is the signs. We need to subtract inside of our parentheses and add our parentheses together. The next mistake is the order. We started by taking from the q, 6 minus negative 1. We need to take from the same parentheses. This should be negative 4 minus 2, whereas they got the order wrong. They took from the q, and then they started the next parentheses with a coordinate from the p. Similarities and differences. You'll be asked about this on your quiz. The biggest similarity is that they each use substitution. We have x1 coordinates and x2 coordinates. If we have both endpoints, we can plug those in. Another big similarity is between the midpoint formula and the formula where we're looking for the other endpoint. That's because when we're looking for another endpoint, we're literally chopping the midpoint formula into 2 pieces. The difference is when we chop it into 2 pieces, we're separating it, making it 2 different equations. This part is equal to the x coordinate of the midpoint, and this part is equal to the y coordinate of the midpoint. The distance formula is the only one where we're taking the square root and we're squaring. It's also the only one where we're subtracting our x2 and x1 and our y2 and y1 instead of just adding them together. Those are just some of the similarities and differences. I'm sure that you can see more, and we're looking forward to seeing them on your quiz. Good luck.